Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stoicon 2025. I'd like to start off thanking Phil and Brittany for setting this up, all the work they did in putting this together and inviting me to participate. My name's Mick Mulroy. By way of background, I've been involved in Stoicism essentially since I was a child, if you will. My father was a professor and scientist and taught a lot of his ethics teachings through philosophy, and Stoicism was the main one that I was most attracted to. So I was, to be frank, that weird kid that always talked about, um, Greek philosophy when most kids were talking about, sports and such. Not that I didn't like sports, and it's really been super amazing to see this philosophy, this ancient virtue-based philosophy, have a resurgence in modern society. So from there, I saw Stoicism in my next phase of life, which was in the U.S. Marine Corps, both as an enlisted Marine and as a officer of Marines. It is essentially required reading. Many of the books that I'm sure the people in the audience are familiar with, whether it's meditations or any of Epictetus or Seneca's writings, are in fact required reading in the U.S. Marine Corps. And it is something that continues to today. I mean, my son was just going through Ranger School, and he said at the library at the mountain phase, essentially every ancient and modern book on Stoicism was present. And then my next stage, going through my background in the Central Intelligence Agency in a group called the Special Activities Center, which is essentially the covert special operations part of the U.S. government, and composed almost entirely of, if not entirely, of former U.S. military veterans. Talked about quite often there, a lot of applicability when essentially how one acts when no one is looking is very synonymous with the way covert action works in the United States. You have to have a moral and ethical basis to be able to do it in a way that I think's conducive to coming from a liberal democracy like we do in the United States. And then after that, I had the opportunity to be Secretary Mattis's deputy for the Middle East. And I think everybody in the audience knows he's a well-known Stoic who carried with him a copy of Meditations and often referenced it. So it's always been a presence in my life. And then when I retired from government, I was asked to speak a lot about the military application of Stoicism for obvious reasons. But I got to know a lot of the major I think movement personalities of this resurgence of Stoicism. So I'm super proud to be here. That's my background. I also have a podcast called Pub and Porch Applied Stoicism with Adam Piercy. Many of you probably know him. So if you're interested in that, please look us up. But today I'm talking specifically about leadership and integrity, the Stoic citizen in public office. This is something I think we need to talk about. And I think this engaged citizen is exactly the topic we should be talking about for today. It is absolutely essential, in my opinion, that more Stoics get into public service. It is not only needed to make good public policy, it's needed to, I think, erode this surge away from not only democracies, but the democratic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and all the individual civil liberties that exist in democracy. So I'd like to start a little bit about how democracy and Stoicism kind of formed one another, and then talk a little bit about the current situation before going into details on how Stoicism applies to leadership in public office. So if you look at democracy. It started around 500 BC, and Stoicism around 300 BC, but in the same place, ancient Athens. And I think a lot of what Stoicism talked about, certainly if you look at Zeno's response to Plato's Republic, so Zeno's Republic, or what we know of it from the fragments that still exist, it was essentially not only revolutionary at the time, it could be viewed somewhat revolutionary today. It promoted the idea that ultimately every human being was capable of reason and therefore should be a full participant in society and the governance of society. It was probably the most significant doctrine, in my estimation, early on to promote this idea of an international human right. The cosmopolis concept that Zeno promoted was not based on, status. Like if you look at Plato's Republic, with the guardians having the prominent role in society based on birthright or caste system or preferred ethnic or racial group or preferred religious order. It was essentially everybody. And that included women. It was one of the earliest that I can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the earliest, at least, reference documents that talked about women being completely equal with men at a time when in Athens, women were treated essentially as some kind of chattel. So I think that is important to point out. And with all of that, I think it promoted more of the concept of meritocracy, vice aristocracy. And so these concepts are absolutely paramount to the development of democracy, because a democracy, in my estimation, relies on the character of its citizens to not only succeed, but to exist at all. And I have a quote from Lives of the Eminent Philosophers. It's referencing Zeno's Republic. The best constitution is one in which all citizens are equal and free, and the laws govern over rulers as well as the ruled. So it basically puts nobody above the law and is a concept that seems to be eroding, unfortunately, more and more today. Ultimately, authority in a democracy comes from the consent of the governed. So I did want to hit a few statistics. If you take The Economist, you have an Intel section. If you take Freedom House or VDEM, the variety of democracies, and look at the statistics, it's actually shocking. And there's a reason why people are talking about this so much. So in the first time in 20 years, there's now more autocracies than there is democracies. By the count on the research I saw, there's 91 autocracies in the world today. So 70% of the world's population now lives in an autocracy. Is that significant? Yes. A decade ago, 48% of the world's population lived under autocratic rule. So a sizable increase. And what comes with living in an autocratic rule? Well, less freedoms, of course. So Freedom House estimates that now 80% of the world's population are less free than they were in 1980. And as some folks might remember, that was during the Cold War. So we're seeing an alarming trend away from democracies, away from individual civil liberties worldwide. And one of the aspects of this trend that I like to highlight is book banning. So it's something that we're seeing more and more of. We looked at statistics that said we went from about 4 years ago, 33% higher than the year before. That jumped to 199% higher than the year before in the United States. And now last year, 300% more than it was the year before. So a very alarming trend. And I just want to read a short list of some books that have been banned in history. The Divine Comedy, Dante. The Canterbury Tales, Chaucer. Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift. Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain. Ulysses, potentially the best book ever written, James Joyce. A Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck. The Diary of Anne Frank, obviously by Anne Frank. 1984, Orwell. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. And To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee. That, as you probably already can guess, is not only banned books, it happens to be almost the same list of the most significant books in history. So I think, as Stoics, we can see the trend ahead of us. I think Stoicism has always been paired with the concept of democracy and human rights. It's now a call of action, if you will, at least from my perspective, for Stoics to become more involved in public life, to promote the concepts that we all know, particularly, and I'll go through the cardinal virtues in people that seek to be leaders, that seek to serve in public office, whether that is a principal at a school, a CEO of a corporation, or the president of a university, or a congressman or woman, or a senator, or a president in whichever country of which you call home. As Seneca said, freedom is the prize we must fight for every day. That is what I think is now necessary to turn this trend around. So the cardinal virtues that I am referring to, and I'm sure that are going to be talked a lot about when it comes to leadership. Wisdom, right? Wisdom is not only the ability to know many things, it's the ability to change your mind, and the way I view it. If there are different facts presented, dogma would keep you sticking to the same line. Wisdom would allow you to take those facts on board and to change your position based on those. Wisdom's also the ability to actually work with others for the good of society, right? What's good for the bee is good for the hive, as Aurelius told us. That is what's, I think, the primary characteristic of leaders and what they need today. It doesn't mean they know everything, but they have the ability to seek out those that do. So this anti-science trend, I think, is a substantial mistake, and use their considerable knowledge and expertise to help shape public policy. The next, justice. So justice is more of just like a law and order version of the word. It is to treat people fairly, equitably, equal rights. It is to have that concept that it's not just your rights that you're fighting for or you should stick up for. It's the rights of everyone. If you can't fight for the rights of everyone, then you're simply only self-oriented. Justice is for everyone. So even if you disagree with the other person, you should stick up for their right to have the ability to say that. Freedom of speech is only really necessary for unpopular speech. Popular speech doesn't need a right necessarily because nobody's going to contest it. You have to, even if you disagree with your opponent, you have to fervently stand up for their ability to say what they say, or you are not ultimately following the concept of justice under Stoicism. Next, courage, right? Courage is more than courage on a battlefield. Certainly saw that many times, but I also saw it in the scope of public policy. I saw people who clearly went against a trend in the room, right? So the National Security Council is the place in the U.S. where public policy is formed, right? Every agency comes together. It's in a building right next to the White House. There is a strong reason, if you will, for going with the crowd. If everybody is going in one direction, it takes actual courage, so moral courage, to stand up and say the opposite. I've seen it many times. I've seen it in the context of even direct military action, where one person had the courage to actually go against the trend and shifted the entire room. I think, at least in part with their argument, but in part because they actually had the courage to say it. So courage is absolutely essential to any leader, and certainly any leader that holds public office. And lastly, and this is a very disturbing trend I think we can see around the world, and apologize, I reference the U.S. all the time, but it's unfortunately permeated every country around the world's life almost every day now. But this trend toward not having the discourse, not having the humility to actually discuss things with civility. We're seeing not only the toxic type environment on social media, we're seeing direct violence against your political opponents. We're seeing the othering of your political opponents. So they're something to be dealt with as an enemy. The terms enemy being used against your political opponents in your country, especially a democracy, is particularly disturbing. So I think all of these need to be taken into account when one is a leader and one is trying to make public policy. So that is a clear and I think very evident part of Stoicism as it relates to this topic. So the last part of what I'd like to talk about is what I think makes a good leader. I referenced that I worked for Secretary Mattis, General Mattis. He was famous for many things, but one of it was he would go out to checkpoints that you have at military bases or forward operating bases, and replace the lance corporal that was on duty as a general, right? So they could go home to their family, say if it was back in garrison on Christmas or Thanksgiving, and then standing a post, and then people being surprised when they saw a general standing out in the middle of nowhere guarding a post. That's an example of the type of leaders that I think we need. The whole servant leaders that goes all the way back, quite frankly, to Socrates when he was a soldier. Not a whole lot of people talk about that. But he was not only a soldier, but quite the soldier, boarded for valor twice, turned it down twice. But he was famous also for giving up his rations to his soldiers, for taking an extra watch so his soldiers could get some sleep. It is the concept, I think, of the Stoic soldier so well captured by Cato. But that is the type of leader, not just in the military context, that we need in leaders today. Those that are willing to do everything they ask those they lead to do, those that are willing to sacrifice for the good of the whole, and basically a willingness and the courage to serve that is so paramount, I think, as I think we all would agree. That is the kind of individual we need serving in leadership. That is the kind of individual we want making public policy. And of course, if you want to have a guide for how to do this, one can just follow Meditations. This was someone who could have used all his power for his own purposes, but did it primarily for the good of the people he governed. In that case, Marcus Aurelius. So I would end with this. It is now time, for sure, to serve. We can see the trends around the world. You can see the trends in your own country. We need to promote the idea of these cardinal virtues, which I think Stoicism best displays in public policy today. And I hope that I see many of you, in fact, take up this call to serve. So thank you and enjoy the rest of Stoicon 2025.